All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are. Thank you for watching. One of the reasons why I start that way kind of ties into what I want to talk about right now. I have a very long history of dealing with cross-cultural things, and so when I do these videos, I always keep in mind that there's people all across the globe that have the opportunity. I'm not saying that they are watching, but that they have the opportunity to actually watch these videos. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time and kind of explain where I come from as far as my background dealing with that sort of thing. So the there's a lot of reasons why I want to do this video. There's a lot of reasons why I'm afraid to do this video. And so hopefully the good will outweigh the bad. But basically, here's the background for me as to what I've been through, what I've lived through, and all this kind of thing was I grew up in Beloit, Wisconsin, on Prairie Avenue. I went to Wright Elementary School. And what all this is getting at is it was a very diverse area. At that point, when I was growing up, there were no Hispanic people in our region, really, except for in Chicago. And even in our school, we had a pretty good mix between black and white kids. Then we actually had one Hispanic kid that was in our class, and we even had an Indian kid in our class. And so this was at a time when schools weren't intentionally segregated, they just were by neighborhoods and things like that. And yet ours was very diverse. And so I always grew up with diversity as far as friends and things like that. And, I never understood racism on a level. I don't want to say the stupid line of, oh, I was colorblind, I didn't see color. No, we all see color. I don't care who you are. Everybody sees skin color. It's fine. Don't be upset to say you see skin color, because when you get into this, I'll explain a little bit more why. But here's the deal. I ended up in this very diverse community and grew up there. Well, I believe it was 1994. I was in 6th grade, and the Rodney King riots broke out in Los Angeles, California. Basically, it was involving, for anybody who doesn't know, it was involved out in LA. Some cops beat up a man named Rodney King, and in response to that, there was some massive riots that broke out there. Well, our neighborhood, or our city, was the only other city that I'm aware of that had riots linked to that situation. And so I think it was on a Thursday night, probably around 11 o'clock at night, 11:30, somewhere in there, a group of people came down the street smashing windows, and they were calling out, oh, a white person lives here, and apparently they even called out, or one of our neighbors was a police officer, and they called out, wow, a cop lives here, make sure you get this house real good. And he was actually a very neat cop. He was a good guy. The community really liked him. So they were calling out who lived where and whatever, and I woke up, a 6th grader. I woke up to the sound of my dad loading his gun, and my mom is crying in their bedroom, and my dad's loading his rifle, and he's on the phone with 911 saying, if they come through the door, I'm going to shoot them. And then 911 is on the other side saying, no, you can't shoot them. And he says, no, you don't understand. If they come in my house, I'm shooting them. And so I ended up waking up. My dad says, hey, get down next to your bed, stay on the floor. So I stayed on the floor. We got in the car, and we, after the riot passed, and then we drove out of town with a blanket over my head and got out of town. And, it was hard because the next day I stayed home, and my parents came to town and cleaned up. We had lost 5 windows in the front of our house. They had smashed out the windows on our house. And then they had cleaned out a video store down the street from us, Video Corner, for those of you from Beloit who would know it. Back then they actually had videos. And, it was very scary. I remember laying on the couch Thursday night after we got out there and trying to sleep on my grandparents' couch, and there was a stop sign down the hill from where they live out in the country, and I would hear cars stop, and I'd get nervous, and was it a truckload of guys, thinking to all the movies I'd seen or whatever, is it a truckload of guys that are going to jump out and come get me? What's going on here? And so we stayed at my grandparents' house for, I think, 2 nights or something like that, and then we came home. And it was interesting because I think it was like on Monday we went back to school. And when we got there, I had a lot of diverse friends, and when we got there, I found that I didn't want anything to do with my black friends. And I remember looking at them and thinking, man, I don't know who smashed in my house. I don't know who attacked me. I don't know who was involved with this thing. Was it kids from my own school? And maybe somebody said something and it registered in me over the weekend, and I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know who was attacking me or whatever. And so we went on with life. We got over it, moved on. And it's kind of a weird timeline here, because when I got older, I was afraid of black people, but not on a level like I wouldn't communicate with them or anything like that. Like, I had very close friends who were black and even Hispanic, whatever. But what I found was, like, when I worked at a restaurant, if white people came through, I would have long conversations with them. Black people, specifically young men, specifically younger people, like older black people, I never had an issue with, but specifically younger black people, I would, get them through the drive-thru as fast as I could. I never realized this was an issue in my life. Didn't have a clue I was doing it. So it wasn't an intentional racist decision that I made. And I want to be clear, I don't feel like I was ever actually racist as much as I responded to a traumatic event that had happened in my life. And so part of this ties in with all the riots that are going on now. They will do absolutely no good for race relations in America. I can tell you that 100%. They don't do anything. So we got through the, I grew up, whatever. And my senior year of high school, we brought in a team called Team Temba. It was a South African drama group that was supported through Youth for Christ South Africa. And I joined the group. And, a couple years later, I end up over in South Africa to be part of the team. I was the only American. I was brought over kind of to help. We dealt with cultural diversity. And so I was there to help bring the American, culture into their story. And then the team was coming this way. So my goal or job was to learn all the routines and everything like that, and then be, the American on the team to help with cultural differences there, but also to create that bridge. And so we came back over I got to South Africa and we did this training one night, and we dealt with cultural diversity. Now, you have to understand, in South Africa, they have this thing, part of their history is dealing with apartheid, and which is literally a legal segregation, where in America, segregation was mostly by choice and whatever. In South Africa, it was a law. You had to segregate, even if you're white. There was rules. And so we were going to do all these trainings on this sort of thing. Well, I'm sitting there as an American, and really, I think they all thought I was the last one to be impacted by it. And we did this training one night where we sat down in groups and we had to call each other by race names, by derogatory terms. And the idea was that they had to bring out the raw emotion that was stuck into a lot of people. Now, whether this is right or wrong in the long run, I don't know. But this is what they did. And so they, we had a whole couple hours of this game where we referred to each other in racial slurs and according to each other. And what had happened was we sat there and we started writing names on the board, and as they wrote the racial groups, they went to the first page, and I think it was like whites, and they had wigger and Oreo or reversed Oreo, whatever, snowman, cracker, all these kinds of terms like that. And then they went through some of the other race groups, and then they came to black. Now, in South Africa, you have to remember they have 4 race groups: black, white, Indian, and colored. And it's not derogatory there to say colored. It is in the States, but over there it's completely fine to say somebody's colored. And so we were doing this training, and I I remember they had wrote all the white names up on the board, and we all kind of laughed through it. And then they got to black, and then they wrote N. And as soon as they wrote N on the board, I just lost it. I started crying. And instantly I understood the hurt behind the people who had marched through my neighborhood as a young kid. And I understood where the hurt and the pain came from, because what I realized is no derogatory word that is used for a white person will ever hurt on the level as what it hurt for a black person to be called the N-word, or to have that implied to them. And it was hard. It was very hard, very difficult to do that. I started crying at that point, and I think I cried through the rest of the night. It was that hard. Now, let me explain a few things. One, there is a issue when it comes to race that I, as a white guy, am not supposed to be able to talk about racial issues unless I speak specifically on behalf of black people and I bash white people, right? That's kind of the way it goes. And so I ended up spending the next 2 years of my life going around traveling and speaking on race and cultural diversity. And I don't think I ever compromised my beliefs. I think some of my stuff was changed along the way, and I had a better insight. But again, I never had this racist mentality as much as I had this fear. And so what was cool was a few weeks later, after doing this training, we were over in Connecticut. And we were in New Haven, Connecticut. And the next thing I know, we're walking down the street, and there's some guys out playing basketball, black guys out playing basketball, and we stopped. And the next thing I knew, I was playing basketball with guys I wouldn't have talked to weeks before. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is really neat. And, you know, I want to backtrack a little bit, because throughout my life, you know, one of the issues is that people always say, well, you can't speak on race because you don't know what it's like to have somebody come after you racist. Well, or based on your race. And let me explain one thing. One, 6th grade, people smashed my house and tried to destroy my house because I was white. All right? I was in South Africa. I had a black guy, literally came on a bus for no reason whatsoever, except for I looked out my window and he said, oh, you white guy with blue eyes, I'm going to come cut your eyes out. And he came on the bus to come cut my eyes out. Thankfully, the other guys on the bus jumped up and kind of protected me. I've had things stolen from me by black guys, and they've told me, well, you're white, you can afford to replace it, right? In Harlem, New York, I went into a bookstore in Harlem, New York. The whole entire bookstore was black owned, and everything in it was why the white man should be wiped out. So I have been through these things where I have had my home physically attacked. I have been almost attacked for it. I've had people say derogatory things to me over the years, you know, based on my skin color. So I do understand. I've also had the opportunity to be in Africa and look around and realize I'm the only white person anywhere in the area. And so all of the things that a lot of black people can relate to are things that I can personally relate to. It's things that I've been through, where I have actually been attacked for my skin color, you know. And so the argument is always, well, as a white person, you can't speak on race. The reality is, actually, I can. You don't have to be a minority to see facts and to see the truth of what goes on in our world. The problem is, here's my biggest issue, is anybody who does public speaking on race, they have an agenda to make sure that at the end of their speech, race really doesn't get fixed, okay? They really don't want race relations fixed because they make money off of speaking on race relations. Now, when I'm writing this, doing this video, I believe there's currently only 4 subscribers to my channel. So obviously I'm not doing this for money. I don't even have a logo for my channel. So this is not a money play, okay? And that's partly why I have never really pursued speaking on race. But the other reason why I've never pursued speaking on race relations is that people do not like the truth when it comes to race relations. So let me get into some of the facts. The facts are actually very simple. It's just nobody likes to talk about them because they hurt people's feelings when you talk about the facts. First of all race groups are different. but they're not different because of their skin color. That's the lie that's been portrayed, is that everybody thinks, well, black and white people can't get along, Hispanic and black people can't get along, whatever. That is not the case at all. What it comes down to is culture. It comes down to culture. It has nothing to do with skin color, everything to do with culture, which is why you can take a black person from the United States and they will be a fish out of water in Africa. The cultures are completely different. I, as a white person from America, struggle to go to South Africa and hang out with white people in South Africa. I struggle to hang out with actual European people, because there's cultural differences, food differences, language barriers, senses of humor, clothing. We have this issue where we bring some of the guys from South Africa here, and sometimes people go, hey, is that one a little funny because, look at the way he's dressed? And say, no. You have to understand the culture. That's the way it is. But that's the issue, is that there is a 100% reality that cultures are different from each other. And the biggest lie that's been perpetrated in America is that all cultures should be able to get along with each other without any issue. That is a lie. Now, we should not hate each other based on cultural differences, but there are cultural differences that will dictate a divide amongst different cultural backgrounds. And I'm trying to use the word culture as much because I don't really necessarily believe racism is so much at play as much as it is cultural issues are at play and people don't understand. It's not to say racism doesn't exist. I do think there are some people who just are scummy people and they hate somebody just based on their skin color. But the cultural difference is usually what divides. So, for example, if you take a black family, and this is very stereotyping, I understand, but you'll get where I'm going. You take a black family, they move into a quiet white neighborhood, and the black mother goes outside to yell for her kids. She will yell at the top of her lungs to get her kids to come home. This is not a 100% stereotype. I understand that, but it's a cultural aspect among black Americans that's how it is. A white American would probably, the mom would go out and barely lift her voice and the kids come running. Or she, has some kind of way to get their attention. And they go, okay. There's a couple of reasons that play into this. One, African culture comes from an oral tradition. So in other words, when you look back, the tradition for Africans, even going into Africa, has always been to tell stories and to have the stories passed down through story, spoken story. In the white culture, it's always been written tradition. So the voice is not so much important among the white culture as it is, we would use pen. We would write our history, write our stories. In the black culture, it's oral, it's spoken. If you even look through the slaves, when they got to America, everything was done through these gospel songs, and that's how they talked, shared their stories and their histories. So you have these cultural differences that are already there. And so, if I, as a white guy, I don't want to go move into a loud neighborhood. I'm a very quiet person for the most part, which is funny because I'm married to a Puerto Rican, and our family get-togethers with her family are incredibly loud. And to be honest, at times they're overwhelming and they drive me nuts because I am a quiet person. I like it quiet, and I like to have smaller settings. But the reality is that there are differences. Food. And one of the fun things for me now, I think it's November 6th or 7th. I don't even know what date it is right now. But we're a couple days after the 2020 election. And right now everybody's surprised because Donald Trump did very well among Cubans, but yet did very poorly among Mexicans. Well, that's because there's a difference there. There's a cultural difference that is incredibly different between the two. The Central Americans and Cubans and Caribbean Hispanics, a lot of them have a better understanding of what socialism is and how bad it looks. So when Joe Biden goes out and puts his campaigns and he uses the wrong term, it relates these people to where they're from, and they say, hey, we don't want to go through that again, because it's a cultural thing. They understand that culture. That's where they're from. And the problem is they put out these blanket things and said, well, this will handle all Hispanics. It doesn't. Every Hispanic group is different. And so there are these things at play that dictate every culture is different. And we have to understand that. This does not mean we can hate somebody for their culture. It doesn't mean we can't work with a different culture, but what it means is there are groups of people that we are not going to feel comfortable to be around. And for somebody to tell you that you have to be comfortable with it is wrong. It's because what it does, one, it strips you of your culture and strips them of their culture. If I have to be happy with all loud people, that means that the loud people also have to make way for my quiet self to come in some way, shape, or form. And then therefore we destroy the culture and we try to do this. This is one of the big issues in America, is that says we're all the same. We are not all the same. We are all very different. And there, like I said, there's cultural differences across the board. It comes in all sorts of things. But we really need to understand that culture can change. Now, there are some things at play. You know, everybody wants to talk about systematic racism in America. And I want to speak to systematic racism because it's one of the biggest lies or mistruths, or I would even say misguided truths in America. First of all, systematic racism is not what the news and everybody's telling you it is. It's not even what most of the activists who speak on racism are talking about. Systematic racism, if you really want to see it, you have to look at things like Planned Parenthood that are strategically placed in black neighborhoods and Hispanic neighborhoods that overwhelmingly abort black and other minority babies on a high end. You also look where condoms are handed out and other birth control things in those neighborhoods. So you already have some factual things right off the bat with Planned Parenthood that's not that difficult to look at and say, wow, there's a strategic thing here of killing black people and other minorities. Then you take that and then you look at the food stamp program. Now, under President Obama, the food stamp program exploded. And why is that? Well, slavery has always been about mind control more than anything. If you keep the people in a mentality that they'll serve you, you don't have to fight hard to keep them on your property or anything like that. So what has happened is the left specifically, and this is not necessarily about politics, it's just these are the platforms and the things that the different parties have held on to. They have strategically done things to make sure that minorities and even low-income whites are addicted to it. And that's why in some cases I would actually say that racism isn't so much at play here as it is a cultural or a class warfare. But specifically they go after minorities. And so you look, food stamps. If you take a look at somebody who's on food stamps, and maybe you are on food stamps, I want you to consider what it would take for you to leave your food stamps. How much money would you have to make up for the fact that you're on food stamps? You know, you have to consider, okay, if you went out and got a job now and decided, I don't want food stamps anymore, I don't want any government assistance, I'll pay for my own health care, I'll pay for all this, then you realize you'd have to get a different job. And in order to do that, there's a lot of scary things that take place. Now you got to pay for childcare and all these other things that you don't have to pay for right now. So there's a lot of mental slavery that takes place. And then what happens is you look at the politics. Republicans are typically against most forms of welfare and things like that. And they believe it should be temporary to help you get back on your feet. But yet the left is now using it as a lifeline and saying, no, it's okay if you live your life on welfare. And we'll pay for your college, we'll pay for this, we'll pay for that, we'll pay for that. It creates a slave mentality. I have to vote for the Democrat the next time around, or else I'm going to have to go get a job or a better job, or, you know, I'm going to have to claim my income, because in some cases that's one of the issues that takes place. There's a lot of especially for Hispanics, it's a lot of under the table pay. So, you know, if you get into this kind of thing, it's very interesting. And stereotypes are somewhat, they're usually based on some form of reality. And so, you know, they play on that. They play on the stereotype that the left plays on the idea that, well, all black people, they don't want to work, they just want to stay at home, and hey, we can give them, you know, this, and it creates a cycle that the minority keeps voting over and over and over again. And we have to be aware that slavery is alive and well in America, but it just doesn't look like what we thought. The master is no longer, a slave owner who works on a plantation. It's government. It's government. And please, it's not the Republican Party. The Republican Party, as much as they get a bad rep and people say, oh, they're horrible human beings because they expect black people to work and they expect other minorities to work and they expect them to toe their line and whatever, they're saying you have the right to do it. That's the American dream, is that you should have the right to do that on your own. And we just have to be aware of that. We have to pay attention to it, and we need to really understand what's going on here. Now, you gotta look at it. I'm a ministry person, right? And when you look at what the Bible says, the Bible is actually very clear that Jesus came for all men, right? The only way that we overcome racism, and we're going on 25 minutes. I'm going to try to cut this short in the next couple of minutes here. But the only way we end racism is forgiveness, right? Jesus does this whole beautiful Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. And he goes through the whole thing. And then he says, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who trespass against us. Do you know at the end of the Lord's Prayer, there's only one line that he has to go back and actually speak about. He has to go back and reiterate it. And he goes back at the end, and you can go read it. I don't have my Bible here where I can actually give you the references and everything like that. But especially, he goes back and he says, look, because if you do the Lord's Prayer, it's a wonderful thing. And then he says, but let me tell you this. If you do not forgive others, your Father in heaven cannot forgive you. The only part of the whole thing that he has to go back and reiterate. Because why? Because we love give us this, Lord, make heaven on earth. We want the good stuff, God. Provide for us. Help us to love each other. Forgiving the guy who hurt me, I don't want to do. And Jesus knew that was going to be a problem. So he specifically said, look, if you don't forgive others, your Father in heaven will not forgive you. And this is mentioned, I believe it's like 4 or 5 times throughout the New Testament. It might even be more. That Jesus uses a line, something like that says, if you do not forgive others, your Father in heaven will not forgive you. So the issue is that if you want to overcome racism, it starts with forgiveness. It starts with forgiving the guy next to you. It starts with forgiving. One of the things I had to do when I went through that whole thing as a child of the racial attack at my house against me because I was white, was I had to forgive those people, whoever they were, right? Whoever they were, I had to forgive them. And say, look, you attacked my house, whatever. I was a kid, scared me to death. You caused a lot of turmoil in my life, but I forgive you. And that's the only way that we overcome this. And the other part of it is accepting responsibility, right? It is nobody's fault that your life sucks except for your own. I don't care who you are, mine, whoever. If your life is terrible, it is never anybody else's fault. And the reason why I can say that boldly is because I've seen so many people in history that have come from way worse situations than I or anybody I know has ever come from. And they have always found, or there's always somebody who can find a way and make their life better. One of my favorite public speakers is Reggie Dabbs. Now, Reggie Dabbs is a black man who was adopted by white people. His mom sold him because she was a prostitute. And, this guy had a horrible life, and he now serves Jesus Christ. His life is good. He's the #1 motivational speaker in America, and that's who he is. He overcame all that stuff. You see, no matter what you've been through in your life, you will never, ever, ever, ever be worse off than everybody else. But you have to accept responsibility. I screwed up my life. I made these decisions. And this is where the issue is coming in with a lot of this, the police brutality things. The police weren't racist when they killed somebody because he was acting like a fool. I'm sorry. That's not the way it works. If you look at some of these riots over the past year or so, and they're so upset that the police shot somebody who was either high on drugs, breaking the law. If you look at Floyd in Minnesota, the guy was in the process of committing a crime. He was high on drugs, had so much fentanyl in his system that they're surprised he was even able to walk. And of course he was psychotic and yelling out that they were choking him and things like that, because he didn't even know who he was at the time, probably. He has to be responsible for that, though. That's nobody else's fault. And I'm not even saying that the cop's innocent, but you have a hard time taking a cop who shoots a black guy and automatically saying, well, he's racist. No, that's not racism. Maybe he's a bad cop, but if he doesn't declare anywhere in his activity that he's a racist, by saying, oh, I'm shooting this guy because he's black, or using a racial slur or something like that, then you can't just turn around and say, oh, the guy's racist, that's why he shot him. No, the guy was committing a crime or whatever, and accountability is number one. So it's accountability and forgiveness. If we can get those two things together, if you offended somebody because of your skin color, either side, you need to hold yourself accountable for it. I screwed up. I perpetrated racism. One of the things we used to say when I was on the drama team, and this is me wrapping it up right now, was that not all of us are racist, but pretty much all of us can be an anti-racist racist. In other words, that we all have a racist mentality. You see a guy walking down the street and he's black and he's got certain clothes on, and you go, ooh, I wonder if he's going to go commit a crime. Okay, that can be the mentality, but do you let it come from your lips? And then do you act on it? Like you grab your kid's clothes or whatever. That's the kind of thing, is an anti-racist racist. So in other words, we do all have racial things built into us where we see racist, or we have racist mentalities, but we have to be very careful that we keep those things collected. And so that would be my thing to you, is please be careful of that, and just be aware of the things you're thinking. Think twice about it. Forgive where forgiveness needs to be. Be accountable for things that you've done. Hold other people accountable for their own actions. Stop taking the easy way out and blaming the cops because some black guy did something wrong. Maybe the black guy did something wrong, and the black guy needs to be told you screwed up, and his family needs to be told that. What we always laugh, because in some ways the white community, if the cops shoot a guy, we all go, yeah, he had that coming. And that's kind of a white mentality, because I think the white mentality, and this is a cultural thing, and I know stereotypes, nobody likes them, but sometimes they're somewhat true. The white culture tends to hold accountability different, and we do hold people accountable on a different level than I think in the black community. And so in the white community, when somebody gets shot by the cops, we go, well, he was stupid, that's why he got shot. The black community, somebody can pull a gun on a cop and they'll still blame the cop. And it's not all of the black community, right? Let's get that straight. It's definitely not. And I would even say, from my experience, the majority of black people would say, no, you have to hold somebody accountable when they screw up. But, that's where we're at. Accountability, forgiveness, and just being able to shut our mouths when we do have some kind of racist thought. So I pray that this thing speaks to somebody somewhere along the line. My testimony's been goofy. God has put me through so many strange things. Like I said, a guy trying to cut my eyes out, and people attacking my house, going to a racist bookstore, all this kind of stuff. But the reality is, God's still in control. God loves us, and we have to turn our eyes on Jesus and just focus on Him. And if it's something that Jesus wouldn't like, then we need to kick it out and get rid of it. And that's simply, just hating people because of their skin color is definitely one of those things. So I hope this blesses you. It's a little longer than what I normally would speak. There's so much more I could say, but I also know that people have time, and your time is precious. So put your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope that this does speak to somebody, give some clarity to something along the line, and hopefully, it opens some eyes to some things. There's a lot of lies that Satan puts out there, and division is one of his best tactics, to keep people divided. And what's the easiest thing in the world is to keep them divided over things they can't control, and that's cultural differences. So let's not be divided. Let's not let Satan win, and let's trust God. All right, thank you. Be blessed, and I will talk to you guys later.